It's happening again. Another country on the brink of revolution. People are flooding the streets, demanding change, and the regime is fighting back with violence. But this isn't just any protest. It's happening in Iran under the rule of Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei. The situation has turned deadly, with over 500 lives lost, and tensions are escalating faster than ever before. The world is watching, but what's unfolding in Iran is about more than just another uprising. You've seen protests around the world, Bangladesh, Venezuela, but this time it's different. Iran's government isn't just any authoritarian regime, it's a nuclear power with global implications. So the big question is, can this revolt bring down Khamenei's reign? Or will it spiral into something much bigger? Stay with me, because what happens next could reshape the entire geopolitical landscape. This isn't just a random flare-up. It's a symptom of something much deeper. The streets of Iran are flooded with people demanding justice, but this is far from an isolated incident. For years, frustration has been building under the surface, economically, politically, and socially. And now it's boiling over. But here's where it gets interesting. As much as the world is focusing on this uprising, it's not just about a group of angry protesters anymore. This is about the survival of a regime that has held power for over 40 years. So the real question is, what happens when an entire population decides they've had enough? What happens when the people of a nation stop fearing their government and start fighting back? Notice what's missing in all this? The silence from the ones who can actually make a difference. Iran's political system might be crumbling, but there's no clear solution. No one's stepping in with the answers. That's where things could get dangerous. The situation in Iran is more than just a protest. It's a full-blown crisis. And here's the bombshell. Despite the chaos, the government is holding on tight. In fact, they've gone so far as to publicly threaten protesters with the death penalty. But what happens when a government has to resort to that level of force? It's a clear sign of desperation. Now, let's talk about the numbers. Over 500 protesters are confirmed dead. The government says more than 100 security officers died as well. But here's the kicker. The official numbers don't tell the full story. Human rights groups believe the real death toll could be much higher. But here's why that detail changes everything. We're not just talking about a rebellion anymore. The people aren't just fighting for their rights, they're fighting for survival. This is a regime on the brink, and the world is starting to take notice. But why is Iran so desperate to crush this? What's behind the violence? The answers lie in the stakes of this rebellion, because if the people succeed, the entire geopolitical balance of the Middle East could shift. The Iranian government is not just fighting protesters, it's fighting its own survival. This isn't the first time the regime has faced massive uprisings, but this time is different. Let's take a step back and look at how Iran has dealt with similar crises in the past. In 2009, the Green Movement sparked mass protests, but it was quickly crushed. In 2019, there were massive fuel protests, only to be violently suppressed. But here's where it gets unsettling. The Iranian government's response is now harsher than ever before. They're willing to do whatever it takes to stay in power, even if it means sacrificing their own people. And this time, it's not just a small group of protesters. These aren't just university students or activists. The protest has spread across the entire nation, from the Grand Bazaar in Tehran to rural villages. The economic backbone of Iran, the markets, is where this revolution is growing. It's not just a political movement anymore, it's a fight for survival. Now, the question is, how far will the government go? How much more violence will the people tolerate before they make their final stand? This is where things get really dangerous. This is where it all starts to spiral. The evidence is mounting, and it's more disturbing than ever. The Iranian regime isn't just using force, they're also employing tactics that are straight out of the authoritarian playbook. They've already labeled the protesters as rioters, agents of the West, even terrorists. But here's where it gets chilling. The government's brutality is only escalating, and the international community is starting to wake up. The crackdown is no longer just about quelling protests, it's about silencing the truth. Internet shutdowns, Starlink technologies targeted. The Iranian government is trying to keep the world from seeing the horrors unfolding on the streets. But here's the reality. It's not working. The truth is getting out. The world can see the footage of burning streets, the images of people packed outside hospitals, images that can't be erased. And here's the kicker. Despite all this violence, the Iranian government's grip is slipping. the people are fighting back harder than ever before. And even the most powerful tool of oppression, fear, might not be enough to stop them this time. The game is changing, but how far can the government push before they push too far? Things are moving fast, and the pressure is building on all sides. First, Iran starts sending out threats to the international community, warning the U.S. and Israel that any interference will be met with retaliation. Then, just days ago, reports came out that the Iranian regime had placed military assets on high alert. Meanwhile, on the ground, the protests are only growing stronger. More people are pouring into the streets every hour, even as the government cracks down harder. And here's the kicker. As the world watches, Iran is inching closer to a breaking point. It's no longer just about the economy, the regime, or the people. It's about the future of the Middle East. The U.S. has made it clear that military options are on the table, and Israel is already on high alert, ready for any potential escalation. But what happens if this continues? If the people keep fighting, if the government keeps repressing, and if foreign powers keep pushing their agendas? The stakes couldn't be higher. We're talking about more than just a political struggle. It's becoming a geopolitical powder keg, and the fuse is getting shorter. Now, let's take a step back and look at what all of this really means for the people on the ground. Because when it comes down to it, this isn't just a geopolitical chess game. It's about real lives. People are dying in the streets, fighting not just for political change, but for basic survival. The situation is dire, and the government's response is making things worse. Imagine living in a country where inflation is skyrocketing, your currency is worthless, and you have no idea how you're going to feed your family tomorrow. That's the reality for millions of Iranians right now. It's no longer about rights or freedom. It's about survival. And here's where it hits home for you. What if this was happening where you live? If your future felt uncertain, if the government you trusted turned against you, how far would you go to protect your family? If this feels familiar, say so in the comments, because this isn't just about Iran. It's about what happens when power goes unchecked and people lose their patience. And no one is immune to it. This isn't just about what's happening in Iran. It's about why this is happening. At the core of this crisis is a system that has thrived on power, control, and fear. So how did it get this far? It's all about leverage. Iran's rulers have manipulated the system using religion, ideology, and the threat of violence to maintain control. But there's another layer, the international stage. The truth is, Iran's regime isn't just fighting its own people. It's been enabled by a global system that lets these abuses slide. Sanctions, proxy wars, international politics, it all plays into this. But what happens when the world finally wakes up and demands accountability? The regime may not fall because of these protests alone. But if the right pressures build from the outside, Iran could find itself squeezed from all directions. Here's the unsettling part. This entire structure, built on fear and intimidation, could collapse at any moment. But that doesn't necessarily mean things will get better. In fact, what happens next could be far worse than we're ready to admit. Now, let's look ahead, because the path forward is anything but clear. Iran stands at a crossroads, and there are two possible futures. One where the people succeed, overthrowing a regime that has ruled for decades. The other where the crackdown intensifies, leading to even more violence and instability. But here's the problem. In a situation this volatile, nothing is guaranteed. If the Iranian people keep pushing, they might force the regime into a corner, but will the international community step in to help? And if they do, what will that help even look like? On the other hand, if the regime finds a way to maintain control, whether through violence or manipulation, this protest will become just another chapter in Iran's long history of repression. But here's the twist. Every day this goes on, the regime's grip weakens. The question is, how much longer can they hold on? And how far will the people push before they're willing to risk everything? The next move is coming, and it's happening faster than anyone can predict. In the end, this isn't just about Iran. It's about the struggle for power that we see everywhere. It's about the people versus the systems that control them, and the tipping point where oppression meets defiance. The real question is, what happens when people stop being afraid? Here's the insight that changes everything. The true power lies not in the hands of those who govern, but in the people who refuse to be governed any longer. Iran is at the edge of a monumental shift. But the next few moves are still unclear. One thing is certain, the stakes have never been higher, and the outcome could reshape not just the Middle East, but the world. So what happens next? If you want to stay on top of this evolving story, follow us for continued analysis. There's more to this than meets the eye, and you don't want to miss what's coming.